Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Mike Carell are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
Welcome, everyone, to another enlightening episode of Snippets of Wisdom. I'm Dr. Michael Murphy, forensic psychologist and psychotherapist, and I'm joined by my esteemed co-host, Coach Mike Carell. I'm honored to have the opportunity to guide us through today's episode on the very difficult and complex issue of psychological projection, a topic that's as relevant in the clinic and the courtroom as it is in our personal lives.
Coach Mike Carell here, integrative life coach and certified hypnotherapist. We're thrilled to be guiding you through today's conversation, letting our unique perspectives on the intricate dance of human behavior. Today, as Dr. Murphy mentioned, we're diving into the complex dynamics of projection. Many of you know that projection is a psychological defense mechanism where individuals unconsciously attribute their own unacceptable feelings or motives onto others, affecting personal relationships, workplace dynamics, and societal interactions.
Now, from a forensic and clinical perspective, projection is more than a defense mechanism. It's a lens through which individuals see the world and that they might misattribute their own impulses, fears, or motives onto others, sometimes shaping narratives in high-stakes environments like courtrooms, family disputes, or therapeutic settings. Projection often operates beneath our awareness, as it involves attributing one's own unacceptable emotions or thoughts to others, often unconsciously, such as accusing others of hostility when we ourselves are feeling anger, or suspecting infidelity due to our own insecurities. It is prevalent due to the mind's need for self-protection and is amplified in modern, stressful societies and social media environments. Today, we'll begin by unpacking the psychological roots and manifestations of projection, looking at case examples from forensic practice and psychotherapy, how projection can cloud judgment, influence testimony, or even perpetuate cycles of conflict. We'll then unravel what projection means from a forensic and therapeutic lens, while Coach Mike examines how it shows up in coaching and daily interactions.
We'll also discuss how understanding projection can lead to greater self-awareness, healthier relationships. I'll offer practical techniques that you can use to identify when projection is at play, bringing in tools from integrative coaching and hypnotherapy to help you shift patterns, increase self-awareness, and foster more authentic connections with others. To keep things going and keep things engaging, we'll pause for a commercial break every 15 minutes or so to give you time to reflect and reset.
And we're glad you're here, whether it's to deepen your understanding or to find actionable solutions. We invite you to join us as we examine the many facets of projection from both the clinical and coaching perspectives. Now we can take a break and we'll be back in a few moments.
Mike Zorich, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorich, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorich has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
So let's begin by defining projection in psychological terms. Projection involves attributing our own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, and motivations to another person. In forensic settings, I frequently witness projection among individuals in conflict, whether in custody disputes or criminal cases. It's a defense mechanism that can distort reality and complicate interpersonal exchanges.
On the coaching side, I see projection manifest in ways that affect everyday life. People may project their fears onto their partners, or a leader may project insecurities onto their team. It's important to know that that kind of vulnerability is best paired with a solid sense of self and stability. Recognizing these patterns is the first step towards creating positive change. For example, if you're constantly irritated by a colleague, it might be worth asking whether or not that irritation reflects something unresolved in yourself. This often happens in love relationships where we do have positive projection. It can actually be turned from a negative into a positive.
That's exactly right, Mike. Projection can also be collective. Social anxieties are sometimes projected onto minority groups or even strangers, leading to misunderstanding and conflict. We'll revisit these forensic cases later to illustrate this further. But one of the things we want to emphasize that perception of threat in any situation often is a precipitant and motivator for projection. Mike?
That gives way to the idea of stereotyping. We often see that when somebody feels threatened, it could be because they've been stereotyping. For example, when you see somebody in a big, fast-moving car, you want to get out of the way because you may see that car as a threat, a big, fast-moving vehicle as a threat. A lot of times, our stereotyping is the source of our fear and not necessarily the person that's projecting it. Sometimes we're looking at a mirror image of our own projection and we're afraid of ourselves, so to speak. I'll be sharing some exercises with ideas that can help clients identify and address their own projections, tools that you can use in your daily routines. One thing we need to know is how legitimate is that threat? Whenever you feel threatened by something that somebody else may be saying or projecting, ask yourself, how legitimate is that threat? That question versus an authentic source of communication, speaking our honest truth and listening to the same in others, can help deflect, can help reduce, and actually change a negative projection into a positive. Remember that projection is often a form of self defense, motivated by fear and anxiety.
That's a great observation, Mike. And we really can think of projection as a matter of polarities. On one side, we have a sense of fear and anxiety. On the other side, we have a stable sense of self. And the more anxious we are, the more insecure we are, the more we tend to project the probability of a negative outcome onto something outside ourselves. And that leads us to perceive that person or situation as a threat. And we're much more likely to then project a sense of negative risk onto that person or situation. So we can delve into some of the clinical and forensic contexts. Emotional intensity that is disproportionate to a situation and repetitive frustrations with certain traits in others can indicate projection. In therapy, projection can become a barrier to progress. Clients may perceive a therapist as judgmental when in fact those judgments originate from within themselves. In the courtroom, projection may fuel accusations or shape testimony. Techniques like journaling, seeking feedback from trusted individuals help in identifying these patterns, which also influence group dynamics and creating scapegoats or heroes unconsciously. I recall a case when an individual adamant about another's dishonesty was themselves struggling to confront their own lack of truthfulness.
That's a powerful example. Approaching projection with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment allows for understanding and dialogue. Complete avoidance of projection is unrealistic, but instead we can be aware. Naming projection in interactions can build intimacy and trust. Though timing and empathy are crucial to avoid conflict, in coaching, I often listen to clients uh, suggest that clients begin journaling about recurring judgments or emotional triggers. And this practical tool can help pinpoint projections. Sometimes the qualities we criticize in others are aspects of ourselves that we're reluctant to acknowledge. It's a mirror reflection.
And one of the things that it's important to point out, Mike, is that projection is not always negative. Many of us have experienced situations, for example, in a loving relationship in which we idealize the other, and we're much more likely to project positive interpretations onto them and even fail to see their inadequacies or problems or issues that might, in fact, increase the probability of our being able to understand them accurately. So projection can be positive with the process of idealization, and it can be negative with the process of negative projection and seeing the other as a threat to ourselves. As Mike pointed out earlier, having a stable sense of self, a stable sense of understanding who we are and what we are, really reduces the probability of projection because we realize that we are safe and we're strong and we can endure our, we're able to endure through adversity. And that is a quality that reduces the expectation of threat and therefore reduces the probability of the need to project negative identity or sense of emotion onto others.
It reminds me of snippets I've seen on YouTube where a dog is barking at himself in the mirror and beginning to react to his own reaction in the mirror. That we often perceive a threat that is actually a reflection of ourselves. And it pays just to pay attention and pause a minute before we react and evaluate whether or not what we're seeing is something coming back to us, from us. It's a good exercise in being vulnerable and yet safe at the same time. Sometimes our
That's a great point,
vulnerability,
Mike. I think that when we feel insecure and threatened, we're much more likely to be anxious. But when we feel safe, that probability is really significantly reduced.
yes,
So
it
really
dissipates.
the sense of the willingness to be honest and to be open and to be vulnerable to another person and to share communication really can be the curative for this process of negative projection and
Yeah,
lead to more positive interpretations.
it's really true. You know, some of us are reluctant to even put ourselves in a vulnerable situation. And it's often because we rely on others to make it safe for us. Um, the real safety comes from ourselves. Before we put ourselves in a vulnerable situation, we need to count the cost. We need to take a look at what the worst that can happen. If we're okay with the worst that can happen, it's safe to be vulnerable. You know, oftentimes when you see people in combat, hand to hand combat, they know they're going to get thrown around, and yet they've already evaluated what could possibly happen, and they take these risks, putting themselves in vulnerable positions all the time, and yet knowing they can afford the worst case scenario in that context. So it's important for us to realize that we're in charge of our own safety, and with every good intention, we can be vulnerable so that it allows the other person to feel safe, to reduce the threats, conscious or unconscious, and then we can take it from there.
That's a great observation, Mike, in the sense that we can even understand trauma as a form of negative expectation and projection. I mean, the person who may have experienced negative outcomes in the past quite reasonably then comes to the expectation that those negative outcomes might also occur in the present or the future. And so trauma and the trauma sensitivity and reactivity can certainly be seen as a form of negative projection. And the treatments for that are similar to the treatments for trauma. And the treatments for trauma involve seeking to recondition oneself to the
Yeah,
point where one can have more of a positive and secure sense of safety in oneself and in society.
yeah.
So I think that that's a great observation in terms of uh, the integration of trauma and
Mhm.
the process of projection.
You know, with trauma, as you mentioned, it often is the source of triggers for a lot of us. You know, and if we could afford the opportunity to look at situations objectively, we can change the triggers to actually motivate us to respond instead of a knee-jerk reaction. Um, Triggers are known for causing a reaction in us, a defensive reaction. And for some people, especially in the military, a defensive action is an offensive action. The best offense, the best defense is a good offense in the military. But it often requires us to take a step back, notice uh, in what events the triggers present themselves, and prepare ourselves to respond instead of reacting to the trigger. And then let that trigger change to a motivation. You know, we don't have to be triggered. We can be motivated by remembering some of those traumatic events, by remembering the situation that we were in and taking charge of our response and what we're going to do. when we see that trigger or motivation.
Right. So one of the most powerful antidotes to the negative aspects of projection is familiarity with the other or the perceived threat. So getting to know the other person, getting to know the other group that we may have seen as posing a potential threat oftentimes reduces the uh, sense of alarm or insecurity that then has the potential to contribute to projection. So, so closeness and communication is usually the antidote to negative projection.
You know, when you say closeness and communication, that those two things are conducive to intimacy, as is vulnerability. When we're with somebody we love and we care about, we make sure that they feel safe in our presence. Matter of fact, we kind of honor and reward their vulnerability by letting them feel extra measures of comfort and support. However, we're not always in the presence of those we love. Sometimes we're in the presence of opponents, or sometimes we're in, in the presence of people that think we're a threat, even if it's a good thing. Sometimes our success can be perceived as a threat to someone else. In such
So that's
cases,
a really interesting observation, I think, Mike, if I could just interrupt for a second, in that ambiguity or vagueness, uncertainty with regard to the situation that we're in is something that really can contribute to an increased probability of negative projection. But
mhm,
once we become more familiar with that situation, we realize that in fact, the perception of threat is an illusion. And that is almost always the case. There are situations in which we see a threat and the threat is real, but those situations are relatively rare. You know, one
yeah,
of the circumstances that I think we experience um, with the ascension and the prevalence of media that we experience now is that threats are made known to us on a much more frequent fashion, right?
yeah,
We hear about things that are negative events that have occurred, even though they may be far away and pose no risk to us.
yeah,
But nonetheless, because we see them and we're aware of them, we tend to internalize that the
yeah,
world and our own circumstances are in fact much less safe than in
yeah,
fact they are.
yeah,
So once again, the familiarity with the other and getting to know the other and communication, further communication, increases the probability of warmth. And warmth is a sign of a positive interpretation with others. And so just behaving as a warm person oftentimes contributes to a reduced likelihood of the negative sorts of conditioning that contribute to
yeah.
negative projection.
The idea that we're surrounded by this kind of social conditioning and negative information. We have billions of bits of information hitting us per second. And the unconscious mind can receive those, but the conscious mind only perceives a few per second. These are things that allow us to create a plan of action so that when we do notice the things that we do consciously become aware of, we can prepare for. We're not in charge of saving the world. We're in charge of taking care of ourselves, which is a lot more feasible. When you think about all the negative things that are happening, it's up to us to decide what are we going to do about it. We can put ourselves, at cause um, by deciding what we're going to do about it. We're going to talk some more about that as soon as we come back, but don't go away because this is getting deep.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously. effortlessly with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
And welcome back. Thanks for being with us. We're going to talk now about projection outside the clinical and forensic realm. Societies and groups have, like social media platforms, often project fears and hopes onto groups or leaders, influencing unity, division, reform, or prejudice. All of these things. Recognizing projection in public discourse and practicing humility through education and dialogue can actually reduce its negative effects, and it can foster meaningful change. Family dynamics are also fertile ground for projection. Parents may project their own aspirations or anxieties onto their children. Partners may project expectations, sometimes obscuring genuine connection. Understanding these things can actually be liberating. We begin to recognize them, we begin to prepare ourselves internally for how we're going to react, how we're going to respond. I see this happening in coaching couples all the time. One partner projects feelings of inadequacy, which leads to misunderstanding. But by fostering empathy and encouraging open dialogue, couples can move beyond projection towards authentic communication.
That's right, Mike. In forensic interviews, I've seen projection influence how people interpret facts, sometimes to their own detriment. By fostering empathy and encouraging open dialogue, couples can move forward beyond projection and towards authentic communication. When we notice ourselves feeling suddenly defensive or judgmental, it's worth stepping back and asking, is this really about the other person?
Yeah. Or is it a reflection of myself? This is where mindfulness comes in. I teach clients to pause and breathe, to notice when they're blaming someone else. And this simple act can actually break the cycles of projection. It can actually open pathways to growth. Sometimes people become frustrated because they feel they're losing control. And it can lead to anxiety, unrealistic fears, you know, I don't know, unwarranted fear. And sometimes you have to just decide, I'm going to take charge of the situation by taking charge of myself. It's important. You've heard the saying, be the change you want to see in the world. That really works, believe it or not. When we lose all hope of controlling someone else, you can begin by modeling the changes you want to see in others. You'd be surprised at how soon you will see people doing the things that you have done, using the words that you have used, and the terms and the attitude that you have used. So you always have a tool. You always have a way of regaining control of the situation by controlling your own heart, your own mind, and your own words.
That's the key thing, Mike. I really see that all the time in psychotherapy, work with couples, works in the legal setting, that uh, when we realize that we have the power to control ourselves, and that's going to help us to be able to influence the quality of our communication with others, that's really the key to limiting the effects of negative projection and really keeping that from happening. So, accurate empathy, the ability to understand others, really understand what's going on with them, and giving them the sense that you really do hear what they're saying, oftentimes will really lessen the need and therefore the probability of negative projection.
That's true. Daily reflection and self-compassion are keys with this. Sometimes we get into a state of mind where we feel pretty noble for being hard on ourselves. We raise our standards to levels that are probably unrealistic. But what happens, I mean, we think for ourselves it's a good standard to have because we're in charge of ourselves, we're not hurting anybody. But it's just a matter of time before your self expectations are projected onto somebody else. And for somebody else, those expectations are grossly unrealistic, creating intimidation, even trauma to some levels. When we're compassionate, when we're kind to ourselves, it'll be easier to be kind to someone else. When you catch yourself projecting, don't judge, just notice. Journaling, meditation, and working with the coach or therapist can really help to reclaim projected parts and integrate them into a free flowing, healthy communication.
That's right, Mike. The problem is that projection is complex, but it also is a natural part of being human. It's a natural way that we deal with our insecurity and fear and stress. And when we learn to recognize and work with our projections, understand our own predispositions through psychotherapy, through honest conversation with others, in that way we cultivate a deeper understanding of ourselves and we create healthier relationships.
It's true. It helps to remember the golden rule. We take it for granted sometimes. We don't pay attention. Some of these old values, some of these old virtues uh, are in great demand nowadays. It's good to do unto others as you would have others do unto you. The golden rule. When you think about how you're affecting the world, think about what would you like to be happening to you? How would you like to be affected by the world, by individuals in the world? What if you were in charge of monitoring kindness throughout the world? It only takes one person at a time. The best person to take charge of is yourself. You have your own heart, you have your own mind, you have your own lips. Take charge of those and master those as if your life depended on it, as if your family's life depended on it. Because guess what? They do, and the world does too.
That's a great observation, Mike, and I think your wisdom and care for your clients is really making a difference in the world. And that's what we all need to do in terms of making things better, with our families, our communities, our marriages. Um, so thank you for joining us for this extended exploration of the issue of projection. May your journey toward self-awareness be filled with wisdom and kindness, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Snippets of Wisdom.
Before we actually go, Dr. Murphy, I think it's important to let people know the resources available I know you have a good practice going, and people sometimes need to get a hold of a psychotherapist. Would you mind sharing your information with our audience so they could reach you if they need to?
Sure. Something I like to share is I have a book on Amazon called Opioid Odyssey, which sort of tells you all that you would want to know about our opioid crisis and how to address it. And also, we also want to feel free to contact me on my website at psychologicalinvestigations.com.
Good, good. Thank you very much for that. If you need to get a hold of me, a life coach, I am at olcp.life, Optimal Life Coaching and Practices. I am at Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I'm available for in-person sessions and virtual sessions as well. Don't be shy. Feel free to give me a call. I do offer free consultations to get to know what I do and to get an understanding of what you're dealing with. So please don't be shy. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all of you and invite your input. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for doing this with me.
Thank you,
It's a
Mike. It's been a great
right?
time. I look forward to seeing you again.
Likewise. See you next week.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with hosts Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.